Today we are talking about leadership retreats, the offsite, the team building getaway, whatever your organization calls it. It is a huge investment of time and money, the planning, the coordination, not to mention time away from work. In theory, they are a tremendous opportunity to generate alignment and motivate your team. But why are some retreats transformational, yet others yield no significant impact? To talk about the gap, here is Hall of Fame business speaker Randall Craig, who has presented at countless retreats as speaker and participated in countless leadership retreats as leader. So a little more about Randall. He has founded several successful startups. He has held a long-time position at a Big Four consulting firm. He was a senior executive at American Public Company, author of 8 books, as we said in the Speaker Hall of Fame, master facilitator, has helped over 100 organizations scale, and works with me at the Brain Trust Professional Institute, helping organizations grow their businesses. So Randall, in your experience attending and speaking at countless retreats and conferences, what separates a successful retreat from one that's merely okay?
So nobody likes 4-letter words, but I think that the gap is determined by one of them, PLAN, plan. If there's planning, it's more likely it'll be successful. If there's no planning, or if the planning misses key things, it's destined to be, a failure, or at least it'll be a vanilla retreat where that was nice, but it didn't really move the needle. That's the difference more than anything else.
When we plan and deliver for retreats, or on-site team training, for that matter, we always ask, like, what problems can we solve at this retreat, and what problems can a retreat not solve? Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, the whole question of expectations, is really, really important. What actually are you hoping to accomplish at the retreat? Is what's the purpose? What's the overall goal? So, for example, is it a reward for achievement? Many sales organizations, for example, have their president's club, and everyone will go on a retreat to some amazing place, and it's basically a lot of fun with one or two little, professional development things put in, but it's a reward for achievement. Or is the purpose to build a stronger teamwork and greater collaboration between everybody? Or is it to learn new skills? Or is it to achieve a certain objective, to solve a problem or develop a strategy or negotiate an outcome or maybe build a tactical plan, whatever it happens to be. And I think that once everyone's clear on what the objective is, it becomes a lot easier to say, okay, so this will more likely be successful. Can you imagine going to where? Can you imagine a retreat, for example, where the person who's tasked with organizing thinks that the objective should be something, and then the CEO, executive director, managing partner thinks the objective should be something else. This is what we want to get out of it. And yet, all the individuals may think something completely different. This is what I need from this retreat. This is what I want to get. This is my expectation, right? So if we think about all these different things, unless there's some alignment beforehand, there's going to be disappointment somewhere. And that's something that's very, very easily avoidable. Once again, back to the planning.
You said something very important. What is the objective? So who gets to decide what the objective is? Is it the person who signed the contract? He or she gets to decide, or in our case, we sort of are very heavily involved in curating what gets displayed.
My God, that's a great question. Because there's what people say. So, the problem that we want to solve, the purpose of it is such and such. And, when we organize a retreat, that's what we assume. So the CEO says this is what they know. The meeting organizer says this is, we need leadership training. Everybody does know how to lead. They sort of, got promoted into that leadership role, but we need common styles and vocabulary. Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. We take that as a given. But then once we actually interview every single person who's going to be at that retreat, then we learn something else. We learn, maybe this, something different or slightly changed, might be what the organization actually needs. And I think that's an important part of the conversation, a part of the planning, because it may very well be that what the senior leadership thinks will solve the problem might just perhaps address the symptom. And they may not be aware of a particular angle, which as outsiders, we might be able to pull out. And so having that conversation to say, okay, is what's needed and what is asked for, are they the same thing? Okay, usually they're pretty close, okay? But when we have the conversation and it's no, no, it's a very specific type of leadership. No, that's not it. At least we've been able to convey some data points, and at least we can set some expectations with the users, with the participants before they arrive about what they're going to get and what's expected of them, etc. On the other hand, if it may be that there's some aha moments, gee, I had no idea that this particular thing was cited by several people as something that is a blocker, an obstacle for them to properly do what it was that was specified at the very beginning. That helps us design some of the specific activities within the retreat itself that'll achieve both what appears to be the problem and perhaps also some of the roots. Right? It's a fascinating conversation. People say the darndest things, and we don't take everything for granted. The fact that somebody says something, that's their very, very, narrow perspective. Yeah, they might have perspective on what other people have, but we're outsiders. They say all kinds of different things, but when a bunch of different people say the same thing but from different angles, we say, aha, maybe there's something here. And when we bring that back to the leadership and say, is this something that is worthwhile addressing in the context of, let's say, leadership? Just to use that example again, the answer is, something, it would, or, please stay away from that because that won't be helpful, or because we want to deal with that from another perspective.
Sometimes we hear from clients or prospects that they have been on retreats or hosted retreats that did not have an impact on the organization. This could be for any number of reasons. Certainly, as we said, the success has to do with upfront planning and right fit topics. But talk to me about this falling flat. Like, is there like things to avoid?
Oh, gee. There's no one right way to do a retreat, and yet there's many wrong ways to do it as well. And so I think that after we've got that purpose clear, okay, and we understand a little bit more about where everybody's coming from, so we can interact with them in a way that's productive. There's a huge number of common mistakes. Here's one: the leader decides that they're going to be the facilitator. Oh, it's so hard being in that corner office. Nobody wants to tell you anything, or people are concerned every time you clear your throat. What does that mean and everything? If you're the facilitator as the leader or as one of the leaders, it becomes very difficult sometimes for people to be fully engaged because they're concerned about what they might say or they might concern. That's one problem with it. But the other problem is very simple. If you're the facilitator, it's harder for you to be a participant. If you're the facilitator, it's harder for you to observe the dynamic because you're busy doing the job of facilitator. So that's one common mistake. Another mistake is the wrong or an inexperienced facilitator. In a retreat, the facilitator really has got almost two roles, besides timekeeper and facilitation, okay? But they've got two roles. On one hand is to pull out as much as possible from everybody who's within the retreat itself, but also to sort of add some value themselves, because hopefully if they're an experienced facilitator and they're, somebody who's had some experience in the business, if you will, of that's related to the organization, the questions that you could ask as facilitators and the knowledge you might be able to share is very helpful. So that's one thing. Another, we talked about already, inadequate planning. It's very, very hard to suddenly just turn on a dime and actually get it. And in a certain sense, if we think about it, if we want people, all the participants, to do something beforehand, that's got to be planned too. So it's not just the agenda of the day. What else? Maybe a wrong mix of fun versus learning activities, right? The fun activities, in a certain sense, grease the wheels. You're sitting at dinner and you can have different kinds of conversations compared to when you're in that work setting, right? Going out and doing some fun activity because it's near some special thing. I don't know whatever that might happen to be, means that people have a chance to connect on a personal level. And one of the huge benefits of a retreat is building that relationship. So you have to actually make sure that there's mechanisms to actually have that relationship building taking place. Part of that relationship building takes place is during the interactive and participative and experiential part of the actual learning that that happens when things are facilitated correctly, and some of them happen during the social and the team building, if you will, part of it. Whether it's explicitly team building activities or just more social activities. So if we get that mix wrong, okay, we're probably not going to achieve the goals. Um, no before activities, no after prep. Um, when there's no after activities, there's no reinforcement. There's no post-event accountabilities. Um, if there's nothing done with any output of the retreat, then the whole thing, nothing changes. Um, when there's an embarrassment that happens, somebody's called on the carpet in a way, well, that's going to shut down everything, right? We don't want to embarrass people. We want people to open up. Um, Bad logistics, the meals, the transportation, the lodging, all that kind of stuff. But I want to mention one other thing that's not actually, people don't always think about, because people don't always think about it, is non-inclusive social activities. So, for example, and these are real life examples um, um, from offsites where I've been brought in to do one particular thing, and I observe these things. For example, how about this? A social or team building activity, which is axe throwing when one of the people is blind. Not a good idea. Wine tasting when one or several people don't drink. Um, Golf when one person is handicapped. They don't have, they're missing one arm, right? I kid you not. Okay, I could go on with things that are very, very well intentioned, but at least for one or two or sometimes three people on the event, at the offsite event, it sort of falls flat and they feel excluded. And that's exactly the opposite that you actually want. If you're going to do these activities, it has to be something that everybody can do something and enjoy. So, oh my God, there's so many other things, but I think that's probably good enough. Take care of these. You'll probably have a very good retreat. So.
You mentioned post activities to create that accountability, reinforcement, bring those that learning through into the organization. How is it, Randall, that more often not, this piece is absent? It's not on the minds of the leaders of the organization, and it's not on the minds of the presenters or facilitators. Many presenters and speakers are hired, they fly in, they do their spiel, and then they're off and they check a box.
And I've been that one who's been hired to come in, okay, do the training or do the activity, then off I go as well, and or stick around for lunch or dinner, then off I go as well, and you shake your head a little bit and you say, well, gee, if I were organizing this, I think there's some very interesting things that could happen. So let's rewind back to why you decide to actually do a retreat in the first place, right? And we talked about some of those purposes at the beginning of the conversation. Um, so isn't it true that no matter what the purpose is, you want to imbue change in the organization through change in the leaders and change in the relationships, and that you want something to change, right? And so we know that you need to do something to reinforce. So if you're going to do a particular thing at the event, how can that be constructed in a way that it's got legs well beyond it? Because everybody knows when you get back into the office, it's more the same. Okay, you've got this huge number of things that are just waiting for you because you couldn't get to it at the retreat, and all of a sudden you're going double time. You don't have time for all this new stuff, right? And this is terrible because, well, actually it's true. Okay, in almost more of the time. So what if, for example, like I had done a retreat several years ago where one of the objectives was to build in a stronger degree of critical thinking, right? And so guess what? There was some critical thinking work that everybody did together, right? Actually, there was some pre-work that they had to do so that when we came to retreat, each of the subgroups were able to we're able to present and we did a whole bunch of things. But what happened afterwards? Because there was an output, if you will, from these 3 or 4 different critical thinking projects, etc. Well, we could have made that project something that was very theoretical, which would have been nice. It would have achieved the objective of let's imbue stronger critical thinking skills in this team. And so we could have. Instead, what we said is, what are some of the specific challenges that the business, the industry is actually facing? And we constructed this exercise so that each of the groups imagined and dealt with an aspect of that. And then afterwards, we said, okay, you know what? We're going to use that. And people in the organization are going to use that output to check in with prospective clients in that industry. They're going to use that as part of the organization's thought leadership, right? They're going to present it to different groups within the organization to share some of the knowledge that they co-created at this retreat, right? And so all of a sudden, there's a whole bunch of other things. And by the way, the CEO is going to check in to make sure all this was actually happening. This has got a lot of interesting legs. It's almost like um, killing multiple birds with one stone, right? But more importantly, it wasn't some theoretical exercise that happened beginning, middle, and end, and that's it, and then we're back to our real life. Instead, it had some life after that, right? That's just one very, very simple example. There's many other ways, many other ways to extend the learning. An obvious one is how are you going to reinforce what's learned? Right? When there's reinforcement, what happens a month after? So for us, we do an impact meeting about a month after where it's not, well, let me just rewind. Right after the event, we'll do a postmortem, but a month after, we'll do an impact meeting, which is what's changed. Okay. And just by doing that, it typically causes a lot of conversations internally, which brings back what was accomplished, what was learned. But it also was a conversation about maybe something didn't actually work, or maybe the people came up with there's a challenge this way or that way. So we can have a conversation about how to address that particular challenge. Have you considered approaching it this way? What if it was reframed that way? I think it's a question of scheduling. Maybe it can be scheduled. Can it be embedded into your management meetings, whatever it happens to be? Or maybe there's a certain type of reinforcement. A particular person or two needs some upskilling or some coaching, or maybe the organization as a whole, we got to move it from the leadership team, for example, or department, across to more people, right? So the idea of saying, hey, if we're going to invest huge dollars in a retreat, we've got to make sure that it makes a difference, right? And it lays the framework to move the organization, because there's some things you can only do together that you cannot do apart, or you cannot do together in the office, because you just don't have the concentrated time.
You mentioned, questioning, do we need to bring in more people to the retreat, right? So when it comes to a retreat having the desired impact, um, is there like a matter of like considering like what critical mass within the organization needs to come? Like we always hear of like leadership, management, retreats, but is there like a critical mass factor?
I think, yeah, there is a critical mass. If you just have a couple of people, that's really more almost like a coaching kind of, thing. And there's nothing wrong with that, a little bit of a group coaching to solve a particular issue. For example, a merger just happened. And more than anything else, the CEO that came from one organization and the COO from another organization have to get on the same page. Okay, maybe the chair of the board too, right? And gee, we're just going to spend a day on an offsite just working through a whole bunch of stuff just so that we get to know each other and get to know how each other work and just get a common worldview before we bring that and involve the next. So that's a very special case. I think that if you don't have the management team, okay, if you don't have everyone who needs to be at the table, sometimes, for example, there's a special advisor to the management team. Okay, that they're long-term fractional. Okay, sometimes there's fractional roles in some organizations, a fractional uh, HR leader, or fractional CMO or CFO, right? So that's part of the team. So that those people should be there. So that's typically, sometimes it's an entire department, right? So that's a typical offsite or retreat. Okay, but there's also something else that you can do that widens it, right? And sometimes you'll hear, an all hands retreat, or the annual kickoff, etc. oftentimes sales teams, for example, where you bring everybody together, and that's where everything for the next year is launched, and that's where people are rewarded, and that's where there's some product or service training and everything, and there's some planning and so on. And those ones are a little bit different because they're a little less intimate. But on the other hand, they're just as important. Why? Because we want to make sure that there's alignment. And particularly in geographically diverse organizations, how can you do that always remotely? There's new people that have joined the team, both managers like senior execs as well as the front line. There's common training that for whatever reason needs to be done in person as opposed to virtual. We know a lot more about virtual training now than we did before, right? But some things are better. Sometimes we want to get people collaborating in a way. And to kickstart that, we can do that at one of these retreats. But the idea, if you've got, for example, 20 people or 60 people or 100 people, at a certain point, it becomes one of these bigger events and it becomes more of an event planning. But interestingly, the one thing that's the same in both is that you're bringing people through a process. There's a beginning, there's the stuff before, and there's the beginning, there's what you do during, there's the ending of it, there's the post work, there's the reinforcement. Those aspects are exactly the same. So, critical mass, it starts at just the management team or the department or whatever it is, or the division, all people who are controllers and CFOs, all people responsible across the organization, all the divisions are all responsible for marketing, right? There's reasons why you want to have those kinds of retreats, right? And once you start adding more and more people, the nature of it changes a little bit more because you can do different types of breakouts and different types of everybody in and different types of specific activities, etc. But the planning and the goals are exactly the same.
Let's talk succession planning within an organization. Sure, when it comes to management retreats, leadership retreats, you invite that, tier of hierarchy. But what about like upskilling your juniors to become your seniors and investing in your high performers? Like, when would it be, or would it ever be appropriate, or would it just make waves? Like, how do you
How do you deal with that one?
deal with
Yeah, that's also a great question because here we get into that sort of zone, if you will, between what's a multi-day training and what's a retreat. Years ago, for example, when I was at KPMG, I still remember I went on the new managers training, which was 1 week residential retreat. Oh no, was it a retreat? Was it training, etc.? But when I became a senior manager, I went to that. Guess what? When I did the consulting skills training, I went for this 3-day thing. So those, in a sense, every single one of those things were extended trainings, but really they were retreats. They're designed to wire people up together, to build collaborative commonality, right? To build those relationships, because those would be necessary. Everybody going into a certain level, everybody now having a certain skill. Okay. And if you just look at them as saying, well, we're going to have people show up, we're going to stuff them full of knowledge, and then they're going to go. We're missing the relationship angle. When they get back, isn't everybody in that particular cohort, aren't they a support system for each other? Might they actually be working together on certain projects? Might it be good to have a common vocabulary that they can flex and build on together? These are all part of a powerful succession planning in the largest organization. In smaller, mid-sized organizations, sometimes you can't do that. That's where coaching comes in. That's where specific, other types of training come in. But the question of is there a role for the high potential people at the retreats? And the answer is yes, if designed properly, but no, if designed properly. And what I mean by that, is if the purpose of the retreat is to solve a very, very sticky problem, people might not feel comfortable, even if somebody was a high potential person, to open up, okay, because of the nature of what the conversations are. If there's some massive change in the organization and that senior team or department, whatever it is, has got to just work through all these things, it may be that outsider is not helpful. On the other hand, if designed properly, there may be a role for them. They might, for example, be a minute taker, okay? Or they might, for example, afterwards have a particular mentee role with one of the people and may be responsible for some of the execution of some of the ideas that were actually designed as part of what that retreat's objectives were, right? And so it really depends in terms of having, you know, non-leader or outside of department people attend depends on really what the objectives and purpose of the actual retreat is and the individuals who are there.
Fair, fair, fair. One of the themes that comes up when we look at how leaders lead has been the question of TMI, too much information. So right now, any given person, employee or otherwise, is overwhelmed by the amount of information that's coming at us or that we have access to. People with an organization get information not just from top-down communication anymore. You just have to look at your colleague's social to find out what's going on. When we deliver, training, particularly virtually, ongoing, monthly, quarterly, or at like a retreat offsite, we will say we don't charge per head. Bring them all in, bring in more departments, bring in your high performers, bring in all hands, upskill everybody. So we can certainly see the benefit to that, but could we run a risk of like a TMI situation where like, people are seeing things that they are a distraction or take away?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It goes back to the purpose, the goals of the retreat. And once you bring too many people in, people will say, "Oh my God, these leaders have no idea what they're doing." Well, no, 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 that's not it. Really, it's the retreat is a special place where there can be some conversations and some changes that actually happen. Where at the very end of the day, the resolution might be something that should be shared with everybody, but it's TMI for people to see all those intermediate conversations. People might be horrified, you know. And just a very simple example, what if one of the conversations is whether you should shut down a business unit, right? Or whether you should move people around to different types of roles. It's totally inappropriate for anybody else to be in there. It's a bit of a TMI. I think there's another aspect of TMI though that's also important. And the question of, what can go wrong at a retreat and an offsite is TMI can be one of those things. There's a lot of sharing that goes on. That's the nature of building relationships with other people. But building a professional relationship and building a personal relationship sometimes with your colleagues, that's all good. But what if the retreat is constructed in such a way that people feel uncomfortable with some of the sharing that they are expected to do, or that they have to listen to other people, do as well. I think that that's just something that people have to be a little bit guarded about, and a little more likely to have a better outcome if they do.
You mentioned, Randall, that a lot can go wrong at a retreat. In terms of assessing on the ground of the retreat or the offsite if things are going well or according to plan, would you say, or would you be able to articulate if there's some kind of like arc of milestones or, breakthroughs that you should see at certain times in the retreat and like when you would pivot from an agenda if things aren't going to plan?
So, there is a Japanese term, nemawashi, which translates to rotating the root. Okay, that's not what that's not what the context of what I mean, but the idea is that before you actually get into a meeting, there's all kinds of conversations that might actually happen, so that once people are in there, everyone's kind of on the same page, and then you sort of start from that higher level in terms of moving to achieving whatever the goal is. I think that people who plan a retreat where everyone magically shows up expecting to be entertained, wine dined, and then magically things happen, the things are far more likely to go off course, right? So a little bit more of nemawashi beforehand means that it's more likely to be successful. We talked about some of that already. Interviewing every single person who's going to be there, right? Okay, working so closely with the client in terms of the actual design of the actual thing itself. Really test driving some of these things with the CEO, managing partner, executive director, just to make sure that there's alignment there, etc. So making sure things happen beforehand so things don't go off. I know I'm not I'm sidestepping your question, right? So I think that as a facilitator, as a trainer, you're up in front of everybody, and you've got to be so attentive. You may be talking, but you're spending more time listening. That's one thing. We don't do retreats, just one of us. There's always two of us. Okay. We sort of joke when Rania, when you're up in front of group people, like I'm the air marshal, just watching to see what's going on, and when I'm up in front, you're the air marshal, just watching what's going on, right? And to be able to have some of the post conversations after every segment, just to make sure that people are on the right track, that there wasn't any misunderstanding, to clear up sort of things that they might be struggling with one way or the other, and that way there's it's far less likely to go off track, right? It's very hard to do that air marshaling internally because, thank you, everybody who's there has got a role actually in the retreat itself. I think there's also a time where where you do a quick touch base. You break for lunch, you break for dinner, etc., and you have the conversation. So in our particular case, we go to the person who's our direct contact, and we also go to the CEO and ask the question, how do you think it's going? Have you heard anything that you've noticed, right? And that allows us to move things around on the fly or change the angle a little bit. It's not a question of, this is so hard when I fly in, do a session and fly out, because if the entire retreat is planned by having people flying in and flying out, there's no way that you can flex to make sure that the needs of everyone in the room and the leaders are actually met.
Randall, I wanted to shift into some scenarios for you. Okay.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
I've actually wrote down these scenarios and I'm thinking, who's going to answer? Is it going to be Randall, the leader, the CEO, Randall, the speaker, or Randall, the facilitator? So we'll see what comes out. There's no wrong answers here, Randall. With that, we're going to break here for part one on our Q&A on landing a successful retreat. We will pick up with more Q&A in part two, but if anything we talked about today resonate with you, if you have a retreat or an offsite or a team training on the horizon, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you and see how we can help. Do email us at info@randallcraig.com or book a call, www.randallcraig.net/30, and we'll see you back for part two.